Thank you for downloading this Real Agriculture podcast. Excite your crops with inputs from Excite Bio. Access nitrogen and phosphorus with Excite Bio's lineup of inoculants and ag biologicals. Since 2010, they've been helping farmers harness the power of the soil. Learn more at excitebio.ca. That's XITEBIO.ca.
The Agronomists is brought to you by Pests and Predators, Wheat Pete's Word, and the Wheat School. From varietal advancements, protein and yield management, precision farming, and on to marketing, Real Agriculture's Wheat School video series tackles every facet of the wheat growing season in an engaging and informative format. The Wheat School is made possible through Syngenta Canada, C&M Seeds, and Alberta Grains. Learn more at wheatschool.com. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Agronomist Tonight Show. Well, we're going to do our best. I'm joining you from sunny Sudbury in Northern Ontario, where I was attending the Northern Ontario Agriculture Conference. Really great day. But we are using and trusting the hotel Wi-Fi gods to make this show happen. So we're going to see how this goes. But welcome all to the Agronomists. Thank you for joining me here. Super excited about tonight's show. Excited to have my guests here, and one who's joining us probably from the furthest any guest ever has. But we'll get to that in a minute. First, of course, wanted to remind everybody, head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomist tomorrow. Let us know you watched the show and collect those CEU credits. You can also, while you're there, sign up for the email blast that will actually email you the day of the show, remind you what tonight's topic is, and the link there. So it makes it really quick and easy to find us at 8 p.m. Eastern. All right, tonight's topic. Just quickly. Hello, Ray. Hello, Kevin. Thank you for being on and commenting so early. All right, let's bring in our guests from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. We have Tyler Wist. But yes, based at Brandon, but not in Brandon right now. We have Santosh Kumar joining us from New Zealand. Welcome here, Tyler and Santosh. Okay, let's start. Tyler, I know you have a lot to say, but I'm going to focus on Santosh for a moment because we don't often get guests joining us from New Zealand. So, Santosh, what takes you to New Zealand this time of year?
All right. So I'm a wheat breeder, and in Canada we have the summer and snow rotation. So we get one crop during the summer, and we want to release the varieties, develop the varieties quickly. So we send all our harvest, or the selected harvest, to the winter nursery in New Zealand, and that's where we come and make selections and send it back to Canada to grow. And that way we are able to reduce the time that it takes to breed a new variety. So it gets the genetics faster into the farmer's hands.
Okay, so you are making selections now in New Zealand, and right? And then the selections you make from this, they'll come back to Canada to be put into plots in Brandon again.
Brandon and many other locations.
Yeah, so exciting. Yes, Kevin's reminding me it's 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. We have a very big country here. It's also, I think it's 2 p.m. tomorrow where Santosh is. So there you go. Who can keep track? Right.
How's the future, Santosh?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
How
does the
is
future
tomorrow?
look?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Tomorrow actually is Canada's Ag Day. So you can celebrate it now, Santosh. Tyler, how is Saskatoon? What keeps you busy in the winter months?
I've had people ask me that before. What do you bug guys do in the winter? Well, what I worked on today was trying to fix our wheat co-op data set. That took me a good portion of the day. Then at the end of the day, I needed to answer some questions to the funders. Oh. What do I mean by fix it?
Oh, yeah. Was it messy? Noisy data? I hear that.
No.
That sometimes.
Tyler's copy and paste issues.
Got it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so I'm gonna
questions of funders. Okay.
I'm gonna apologize to Santosh for that messy data. It's coming back together now. Because Santosh is one of the ones who receives it. And then we take that data, or the breeders take that data, and they say, this line here is got the SM1 gene and it's working. So it is presenting as tolerant to wheat midge. And if they don't get that data, then they have to leave that out of the report.
This is very important. And so tonight,
important.
for this conversation, we are going to talk about the SM1 gene and many others. But first, let's talk about the foe that we are up against. And so, Tyler, I'll start with you. We do have a little video clip that I'm going to play a little bit later, which is about scouting for wheat midge, and it was from, I believe, 4 years ago, I want to say. And so, Santosh, you're gonna update us on all the cool new varieties coming. But Tyler, tell us about the foe, the wheat midge that prairie farmers are battling against. What do we need to know about it?
All right, so first let's start with that video that we did 4 years ago while I was standing in a wheat field. And I'm going to throw it out to our listeners to say, can you spot Tyler's error in that video? And then after the video, I'll bring it back in. Yeah, I like doing audience participation. I'll tell you.
So you want to go to the video? You want to go to the video right now?
No, let's talk about the wheat midge.
Okay, good. I was going to say. Yeah, let's.
I'm not running the show. You're running the show, Lindsay. We're doing what you want to do.
That's right. Okay, Dave Hooker has joined a smidge late. I like puns. Dr. Dave Hooker gets a gold star. Okay. So
can you send him a hat? I think you should send him a hat for that joke.
I should send him a hat. Producer Jay, can you write down who I'll get the hat?
Probably steal that joke.
Yeah, there you go. You talk to Dave Hooker about it. Okay, midge, tiny little orange insect. What damage does it do to wheat?
Okay, so you're thinking, why is this little orange fly such a menace? So the whole thing is called the orange wheat blossom midge. It goes after the blossoms of wheat, which are not very evident. Right? They don't look like our normal flowers, but if you're a wheat breeder like Santosh, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so they'll target those individual spikelets or florets. And who's doing the targeting? Well, the female wheat midge. So she comes out of the ground and she's really well synchronized with the spring wheat in Western Canada, at least. And she lays her eggs. She likes to lay the eggs under the gloom, which is this covering that goes over top of the kernel. So, I don't know. There we go. Yep. Gloom's covering the kernel. So eggs go in here, larvae hatch, and it's the larvae that are the damaging phase. So if you're not an entomologist, a larva is the juvenile form of an insect. So you got some pictures of larvae there, I believe. And we can tell you where the orange part comes in, because check these things out.
Now, okay, while we're
so that is orange. That one's a pupa.
That is. Yeah.
So, but check out what's going on in this pupa. You see that? It's got devil horns. So it tells you a bit about what's going on.
This is, that is hideous, actually. You probably think it's, beautiful. I
think that's super cool. I printed this one out, and I gave it to Dr. Martin Erlandson for his retirement present.
That is kind. Now, did you leave it in this orientation, or do you stand it up so it makes it look even more ominous?
Oh, yeah. So I had it zoomed right in, stood up, and right beside it was the ascension number, because Martin was working on characterizing the whole genome of the wheat midge.
Jeepers creepers. Okay. These are very...
So I used the ascension number that he had put up onto the Barcode of Life database.
Very nice.
And I may have gotten that completely wrong, because that was a few years ago. But I definitely gave him a picture of a wheat midge pupa, but not the one that he used, because that got turned into nothing but DNA.
Right.
But it is orange, and so that's where the name of the orange wheat blossom midge comes in. Now, if you're a breeder, you just call it the midge, and most producers will just call it the midge as well. There are other midges out there, but most of them aren't going after your kernels of wheat.
That was my question. Okay, so this is an adult. Look at her.
Yeah.
How do you know it's a female?
Well, because she's sitting on a wheat head, first of all.
Okay.
The males like sitting on the females. They don't really sit on the wheat heads.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I can also look at her ovipositor, which
Mm-hmm.
if I had a pointer, I'd be pointing at the bottom end of her abdomen, which is pointy. So that's her business end for laying eggs. And then
All
I can
right.
also look at the other end of her, and she's got short
Mm-hmm.
little antennae compared to the male. And on the
Okay.
female, they often kind of curl up and back.
Mm,
And
very
so the
pretty.
male have really long antennae, and they've got lots of long cincillae trichodia, and they use that for smelling the female. Because, like I
Mm.
said, they would
Pheromones.
pheromones exactly.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so we use those pheromones against the wheat midge. So we can bring them into traps and count them by the hundreds in a lot of cases. But
Mm-hmm.
what we're counting are the male wheat midge. And so when we're looking at correlations between females on heads and males on cards, it's just, and damage in plants, it's really tough in Western Canada with such huge fields to just make it all work. I'm still
Mm-hmm.
trying, but hoping we'll get there eventually. So she's looking for wheat that is susceptible. So we're looking at Zadok stage 50 to about 60. So
Okay.
when that plant gets into about full anthesis, it actually becomes less attractive to the female wheat midge because her
Okay.
offspring don't do as well on the later stage wheat. She will potentially still lay eggs on there, but she's looking for those younger heads. And as soon as that boot splits and you can see the spike of wheat starting to come out, so can she. And she'll start laying
Mm.
eggs on it.
Okay. So, for producers or agronomists who are scouting, if you're in a problem area, which we're going to talk about some of those hot spots, do you start scouting at, early heading, or do you give it a little while? How early do you start?
So you want to start as soon as that boot splits. Or
Really?
if
Okay.
you're part of the CCAN hashtag Midgebusters pheromone monitoring network, you start when
Right.
you start seeing a whole lot of males stuck on your pheromone traps.
Okay. Also a good indication. Okay.
Yeah. So the males come out a day or two before the females. And so they're a really good indication that you should be out there scouting your fields for females.
Okay. Now, Santosh, you're based at Brandon. And we will bring up, we've got a Saskatchewan map of the 2023 year. Manitoba doesn't do a survey, but is it difficult at Brandon to judge how well a variety does against midge? Do you ever have to worry about releasing some of these beasts, or are they all there?
Oh, they Brendan is has been a very high infestation area for wheat midge since I joined the program. So we never had any issues with screening for midge resistance. Typically, a variety that is grown at Brandon will do better if it has midge resistance. So
Mm,
if there is a line that is susceptible, it automatically yields less than a resistant variety. So we actively or passively select for wheat midge resistance because the varieties that do have the resistance do well in the yield trials.
Yeah,
Okay,
Brandon's one of our
so
best sites.
let's, okay, right. Well, it's your best because it's bad, right?
Exactly. Yes. You always have to qualify best for an entomologist. It doesn't often work as
Mm-hmm.
best for a producer or a wheat breeder.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so Santosh, walk me through. We're going to talk about how you develop a cultivar, but if you could paint a picture for me of what it's like when you're screening for these lines, do you assess for midge damage at the end of the year? Are you scouting early in the season? What does that look like as far as how you judge how a variety does against midge?
Okay, so in the breeding world, we always say that a bag of yield, a bag of seed as yield is always the best indicator of whatever happened during the season. If the midge resistance is there, it will yield more. But yes, we do scout fields for presence of midge. Typically, when we send data or samples to Tyler, we make sure that we have enough pressure and we haven't had any poor years of infestation yet. Every year there is lots of midge. So we do the scouting as Tyler suggested, and we do just crush a few grains in our in our hands and look at what comes out. Typically, if the larva is present, we are able to see it. If the damage is there, we are able to see it on the seeds, and then we know that there is much pressure, there is decent amount of pressure. We don't actually do counting because we have gotten away from that laborious process when we have to do other things. But
Mm-hmm.
as long as the damage is present, it infers that the larva is present as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
Tyler,
then
what
we
is the damage?
subsample.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No,
Um,
go ahead.
yeah, Tyler, what does the damage look like? Like, is this shriveled kernels? Do they have like pockmark? What is it? What does it look like?
Yeah, why don't we throw that image up there, producer Jay? So
We had a
when we're
nasty larva.
dissecting, yeah, do we? Okay.
Ugh,
So
hideous.
on the left, decent looking seed, and then it just gets worse. So you see
Mm-hmm.
that one second from the right, it's cracked open, it's split. And then the one on the very right, what we've got there, we call those damaged, unharvestable. Those just blow out the back of the combine. So that's that yield
Right.
loss that Santosh is talking about. The one that's cracked may stay in your sample, and then
Mm,
that can lead to grade losses when it goes to the elevator, because all of your samples get looked at for midge damage, and those cracked seeds can get into there, and it'll mess with the falling number of the wheat.
mm. It's kind of ugly. Won't lie. Um,
Totally
yeah, it really is. Okay, and so it is a yield concern, but it is a quality concern as well,
can
Santosh.
be,
So
yeah.
yeah, it can be if it's bad enough. So um, when you're, how does that work its way? How does the quality component work its way into your breeding program, Santosh?
Great point. So when we develop a wheat variety, I typically deal with the Canada Western Red Spring (CWRS) variety, and after the harvest, it's sent to Canadian Grain Commission, Grain Quality Lab, and they assess the damage and provide the grading. So if the damage is quite high, I mean, if it's really bad, then it just flows out of the combine. But if it's bad, it looks the grains look damaged, and they are then downgraded. So then that gives us an indication of how much damage is there, and that way we are able to screen the line in into the breeding program or discard it altogether.
Hmm.
We, for early generation lines, we do it in-house. So within the breeding program, we are able to look at the kernels and decide that way, because when you are going through many different traits, one of the traits is put a little bit of seed in white cups and just look at their physical appearance, and that's an indication of how much damage is there. So if the lines are really bad, then we just discard those lines and they are no longer part of the breeding program.
Hmm. Now, when you're talking about screening, that is that's not within the SM1 gene lines, or is that only within those? Are you doing this for all varieties that you're assessing?
So we go through all the varieties because early in the generation we don't know which lines have the
Mm.
SM1 gene. If if a cross is made, why don't we put on the breeding pipeline and I'll be able to
Sure,
explain it
Yeah.
yeah.
if that
Let's
works.
see those
Yeah.
slides.
Let's let's get excited about it.
All
It
right.
is really cool. All right. Okay.
It's a busy slide, but I'll go through it. So bear with me, please. So if you're looking at P1, which is the female parent in this case, and P2 is the male parent, a cross is made to bring in traits, bring in important traits that make the variety better for Canadian farmers. For example, if you have the male parent which has the SM1 gene and a female parent that
Mhm.
doesn't, then that gene starts to move around in the breeding
Right.
pipeline as we go through. So many populations that are developed from these crosses may or may not have the gene. So the first
Mm.
step is to look at the morphological, as I said, the seeds in the cups. But as we go further and keep selecting lines, our population tends to have more lines with SM1 gene present
Right.
because we are discarding the ones that don't have it and they yield poorly at Brandon. So that's one
Right.
aspect of it where you're looking at presence and absence of the trait itself, the damage. Then you can also supplement it by the markers, and that we'll talk about a little bit later. But that's exactly how we incorporate the trait, work with it within the breeding program, and finally, hopefully, at the end of it, we'll have a line that is midge tolerant if it has other traits that we need in breeding program.
Mm-hmm.
So just going through this, or do you have a question?
Well, I was just going to say, you mentioned at Brandon, if a variety doesn't yield well, it's probably because it doesn't have midge resistance or tolerance. And so, of course, as you put there with the agronomic objectives, if a line doesn't have the yields, it doesn't move on anyway, right? So
No.
it sort of becomes you're selecting one anyway for the other.
Exactly.
Okay. Just all right. Next slide, Jay.
So in this, I'm exclusively showing how I do midge resistance breeding. And that's typical for any breeder within the Canadian context, be it from AFC or from universities or private breeding companies. They follow a very similar pathway. The first step is to find a parent that has midge tolerance. It can be male or female in the crosses. And then if the two varieties that you are bringing together are very good, they are very CWRS worthy varieties, then we put it through a pipeline called double haploids. And what it does is that it allows us to get the homogeneity and uniformity in the population very soon. So you don't have to go through F1s, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You directly reach the F7. It saves a lot of time. Within a year or a year and a half, you have saved 4 years. And that brings the SM1 gene into the population at a uniform and a stable way. And then we move it into the advanced testing. So the double haploids are made, and that we call it early generation. If we don't make the double haploids, it does go through those breeding pipeline where we are making the F1s, then we send, screen the F2s, send the F3s to New Zealand, F4 goes back to Canada, F5 comes to New Zealand, and so on and so forth. But once we reach a stable and uniform population, then we start testing it in multiple locations. Because let's say I'm working from Brandon, but the variety that we release is not only for Brandon, it can grow across Western Canada. So we have to test the suitability of the line across many regions, all 3 prairie provinces. And that's when the advanced testing results show us. Once we have that done, we make sure that at one of those stages, we actually do physical screening or marker screening for the SM1, because so far we are just going by the results that are passive.
Right.
Once the marker selection or physical selection is done, that's when the lines enter into the registration trial. And that's very critical. It's mandated by Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and all the breeders put their best lines forward into the registration trial. And you can see that in all 3 years of the registration trial, midge testing is compulsory. So that's where Tyler comes in, and he makes sure that he gets the data from all 3 years of the registration trial, and he evaluates the lines for resistance or susceptibility to the midge. Once that data is compiled, we are able to register a variety either as susceptible or resistant to SM1 or wheat midge.
Wheat midge. And so this is where Tyler's copy-paste problems come in. Okay, so I want to take just a quick pause. We're going to, because I want to follow this through a little bit further and talk about, as you said, the genetic markers in the SM1 gene. We're just going to take a quick moment to thank tonight's sponsor, or one of tonight's sponsors, and then we'll get back to this conversation. Our sponsors for The Agronomists are Wheat Pete's Word, The Wheat School, and Pest and Predators. The Pest and Predators podcast series features top entomologists introducing the insect field heroes hard at work for Canadian farmers. Powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation, Pest and Predators is an in-depth look at many insects who share our fields. Find out more at Real Agriculture to download the podcast, or visit fieldheroes.ca. look at all those field heroes. I was in a chat today, Tyler, where one of the researchers, she's doing her master's at the University of Manitoba, is looking at ground beetles and a native pollinator, a native bee species, and measuring that in with crop diversity. It was a fascinating discussion, and you'd probably enjoy it. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back here. I think you would have. Yeah, absolutely. We've got a question that's come in, and I think we've talked about this one before. And Tyler, I know you're in Saskatchewan, but let's talk about timing and where some of these show up. So there are, of course, many different kinds of midge. In Ontario, we have Swede midge that attacks canola and is pretty nasty. It's why a lot of producers won't grow spring canola. We grow winter canola here in Ontario. But there isn't necessarily a lot of damage in wheat due to wheat midge here in Ontario. We do grow mostly winter wheat. So we have the pest here. Is winter wheat in Western Canada under threat of midge, or is it really just our spring wheat lines that are a problem?
So spring wheat is synchronized well with the life cycle of the wheat midge. Winter wheat is not. So winter wheat does what we call escape. And so it heads out before the wheat midge come out of the ground. So that's likely what's going on in Ontario.
I know we're not talking about the canola midge or sweet midge, but just quickly,
Right.
we have a. Is it called canola midge? It's not sweet midge, right? We established that. That
In
was found in
Western Canada,
Saskatchewan?
yeah, we have a newish midge that's now called the
Newish.
cauliflower midge. Yeah,
Canola.
yeah,
Okay, new-ish. Okay,
yeah.
canola
And
flour
you
midge.
can check up on Dr. Boyd Morey's work. He's probably been on the
Okay.
Agronomists talking about that. And you might have to take away
Okay.
Dave's hat if he thinks that we're
Mm.
talking about Swede midge right now, because it's a totally different species.
He does not. He was just sort of adding some context. So don't worry, Dr. Dave still gets a hat.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah, so no worries there. Yeah, we got it. But definitely differences between East and West. But as you mentioned, it's the timing of when the heads are coming out and the females are emerging that really make it the issue for spring wheat. Okay, so that is important. Okay, so Santosh, um, let's come back to the SM1 gene, because this is what we have as far as resistance within our wheat lines.
Right.
We do have the SM1 gene in many lines. However, that is, as far as we know, Santosh, is that the only resistance gene that we've worked into cultivars at this time?
Yes, yes, but I just want to add a little bit more context to it. So there are two methods of resistance. One is the antibiasis, which is based on SM1, Pseudodiplosys melusina 1 gene. It's the name of the insect, and we call the gene by the name of the
S
insect.
M. Yeah.
SM, yeah,
Got it.
Pseudodiplosys melusina. And this is the first gene and the only gene so far. That's why we call it SM1. So that's antibiasis, the only one. And then there is the other type of resistance called antizoonosis, which is called the oviposition deterrence. Now, it's not as effective as the antibiasis because it literally kills the larva when it feeds. Antizoonosis is where the larva is still able to infect and cause damage, but there are volatile compounds in the wheat spike that minimizes that damage. It doesn't stop it. It doesn't stop the larva or kills it. So there are two mechanisms, one very effective, one not so effective. So we want to use it together, and we try to bring those two traits together in the varieties. The SM1 gene, just a little bit of history. Back in the day, Julian Thomas, who was a cytogenetist at CRC Winnipeg, he was studying this trait with many other breeders and geneticists, and he did a cross between Augusta and HWA line. And that's when they found out that it's present on chromosome, I think it's 2BS. Wheat has many different chromosomes. 2BS means it's coming from the B component of the chromosome, and S means it's the small arm of the chromosome on chromosome 2bs. And that's where also the leaf rust resistant gene is present, LR16. But basically, that gene it's the first time we were shown that this is the gene, and a marker was developed. That's when it became mainstream trait development work for breeding, when we knew that it provides resistance and we had a marker to use it. Then many lines were tested in Canada, and one of the lines was Clark. And Dr. Stephen Fox, my predecessor in the breeding program, he started making some crosses. And the first line that came out of the program was Unity. And some of you may know that. I just saw the comment.
Santosh, I warned you not to read the comments. But yes, Ray.
Sorry.
Plant breeders have a
Anyways,
sense of humor. It's true.
So BS or not to BS? Yes, it is to BS.
That's right. Yes, it is. It is 2BS. Okay, so Unity, which that one
Unity,
is relatively familiar. Yeah.
Yes, and it was the first CWRS line in as far as I know that had the SM1 gene in it, and it was a cross between I think it was Mackenzie, which was the first DH line produced. Then there was another line, BW174, and then it was crossed to Clark. So Clark became the donor of the line where 174 and Clark was crossed first, and then it was crossed to Mackenzie. And that's how Unity was developed after many years of selections. And the crew that I work with was part of that team that actually brought this cross into a CWRS germplasm. So that's a little bit of history on SM1. We now have, with a recent publication out of Kurt McCartney's lab, where we have the oviposition deterrence gene on 1A, chromosome 1A, and that now we have a good means to start bringing those two together and have both of those mechanisms in one plant, because we do need to protect the SM1 gene. As we mentioned, Tyler and I have worked really into this, that we have to protect this gene. We have evidence from Marjorie Smith work that if we just keep using the SM1 gene without having a refuge in the variety, the midge insect will get resistance to this gene very quickly. And that's how the midge stewardship came in to protect the gene. So those are two options available to us that allows us to maintain the resistance to this insect. And if I'm not mistaken, Tyler, I don't think there are any more chemical options to control this insect anymore.
It's a good
question. We have
question.
one chemical control option left. So dimethoate is still registered. It's less effective, and it acts on the adults. So you really have to really target them well.
So when do they fly in the evening? Do they not?
So if you're scouting and spraying, it's about 8:30 at night that you're out there looking for these things. 8:30 on. So dawn and dusk.
That could be other problems that you run into as far as spraying. So I guess that is one of my questions, and I know it's in the clip, which we're going to go to in just a minute. I think I left it in there, but that's just it. This isn't necessarily, like a lot of our insect enemies, spraying is not always necessarily an easy decision. Maybe the numbers are there, but as you mentioned, Tyler, I mean, control options might be very limited, or the timing might have to be absolutely bang on, or you're not necessarily going to get the effect that you're looking for. Yeah. Okay, I have a question for you, Tyler, about the SM1 gene and the other gene that's on the 1A, not the 2BS chromosome. Santosh, we should have brought like a layout of like the wheat genome, because it's ridiculous. Anyway, but it's very complicated. All you wheat readers are amazing. Okay, but producer Jay, if you could, we're going to throw to this ancient history video here that Tyler did in a field a couple years ago. And Tyler, you said we have to spot the error. Is that right?
Spot the error.
Spot the error. Let's head to a field out in Saskatchewan and spot the error.
Right. So what you're looking for is you want to be at the lake on the long weekend in July, and you don't want to be in your field scouting for wheat midge, but that's typically when they start to come out. So you get your boat in the background, you want to be looking for your wheat midge at dawn or at dusk, because that's when they like to fly. So they, during the daytime, sit down in the canopy. You won't see them until things get calm, sun goes down, and hopefully there's enough light for you to see them. What you're looking for is you are looking for these little delicate orange flies flying around the top of your canopy right around that first week in July. So they're really well timed to the spring rains. So they need 25 millimeters of rain to kickstart their development in the ground. And what else does your wheat crop need? About the same amount. So they're really well timed with the emergence of spring wheat.
They know their stuff.
That's why there's such a big pest here on the prairies.
No kidding. What is yield loss like?
So yield loss, if you've got at our economic threshold, which is 1 on 10 heads, that's where you start to lose yield. If you've got 1 on 10 heads, we're looking at about a 15% yield loss. Now, 1 on 10 heads is not a lot. So you're looking in the canopy and you're watching 10 heads. Now, another problem that wheat midge can cause is grade loss. So when those wheat midge larvae tap into the kernel, those kernels shrivel up. And if they shrivel up enough, they'll just blow out the back of the combine. They won't go into your wheat sample. But if your seeds are only slightly damaged, that'll go in your sample and you can get grade loss. So the economic threshold for protecting your grade is more like 1 on 5 heads.
Oh.
So that's what we're looking at, 1 on 5 or 1 on 10.
Mm-hmm. Anything to really combat it now?
So at that point in time, if you decide that you have a problem in your field and you haven't planted a midge-tolerant variety, you're probably going to want to get on your sprayer. So I was showing a picture earlier today of a crop where we had 10 heads and there were 7 wheat midge on those 10 heads. And so each of those wheat midge will lay about 3 to 4 eggs on each kernel, and that will wipe out the kernel. So at that kind of pest pressure, which can happen if conditions are right, we can get up to a 90% yield loss in a field.
Oh my gosh.
So back in the 1990s, we had that. We had hectares after hectares being sprayed, and still $130 million in yield loss right here in Saskatchewan.
Wow, just from wheat midge alone. Now, I believe you are working on midge-tolerant wheat?
So the field behind us is not midge-tolerant wheat. This is a variety that doesn't carry the SM1 gene. Why? Because I'm trying to grow wheat midge right behind me. Yeah, don't tell anyone.
Don't tell anybody. Yeah.
So why am I trying to do that? So that I can test out the next generation of midge-tolerant wheat. So we're looking for other genes, other resistance genes, because right now we've got one resistance gene. So it's called SM1. S stands for cytodiplosis, M stands for Moselana. You put them together and you've got the scientific name of the wheat midge. So one gene, one single mode of resistance, and it's the first gene and the only gene. So if midge overcomes it, and there have been some midge that have overcome it, we're going to wind up losing that resistance gene, and it has been a boon to farmers. $36 an acre.
The Agronomists is brought to you by the Wheat School, Pests and Predators, and Wheat Pete's Word. Each Wednesday, Peter Wheat Pete Johnson answers your top agronomy questions in this dynamic podcast, covering soil health, cover crops, planting, herbicides, and so much more. Have a question? Leave him a message at 1-888-746-3311, send him a tweet at Wheat Pete, or email him at pjohnson@realagriculture.com. So, Tyler, I took furious notes, and I don't know. Yeah, Ray says it looked like the anthers were out already. So, yes, that's true. It was already, for that particular field, if we were scouting to make a spray decision, probably a little late. But you did roll out some numbers, and I don't know if they're true or not, because you're the expert. So, Santosh, did you find a mistake?
I am not aware of any wheat midge that has developed resistance to the gene yet.
I wondered about that.
Ooh,
Tyler?
Interesting. Okay.
Do we?
I'll start
Yeah.
off first with, I'm glad I wore my black shirt because that would look funny. We're in the exact same
If you were
shirt.
wearing the same shirt. Oh, Jason
All
Vogt
right.
weighs in. Shouldn't the threshold be 1 per 5? 1
Yeah.
per 4 or 5 heads. Oh.
Ray doesn't get a hat. Jason gets a hat.
Jason gets a hat. Producer
Santosh
Jay,
doesn't
write
get a
that
hat
down.
either.
So, okay. So the
So
threshold is 1 per 4 or 5 heads.
yeah, so that is the yield threshold of 1 on 4 or 5 heads. I just say 1 on 5 heads. And I did that in the
Yeah.
field, but sometimes when you're standing in a field with a camera in your face, you get things
It's weird.
backwards. So the grade threshold is 1 on 10 heads. The yield
Right.
threshold is 1 on 15 heads. Sorry, 1 on
That
5
makes
heads. I
sense.
did it again.
See?
And
We got
yeah,
it. We got
and
it. Yeah.
Santosh, there are midge, individual midge, who can survive on SM1 wheat. We had some at our
Mm,
farm. We had some at a USask farm, and Marge Smith found them probably at Brandon early on. So that's why we need the SM1 gene to be in that refuge. So if you're buying a
which
midge
we're going to talk
tolerant
about
wheat,
now.
it's going to end in VB, varietal blend.
Yes. Let's
right.
talk about that now. But please, Tyler, tell me you squashed all those, the ones that survived?
Yeah,
You
well, they
took,
were in the
you took,
lab.
okay, so they were good
Actually,
and dead.
funny story. After we started talking about those, our wheat geneticist said, "Where are they? I want them," because we're trying to find
Oh,
the genetic
right,
trigger that makes them be able to survive on
right.
SM1 wheat.
And you were like, sorry, they're squished in my palm.
No,
Um,
no. I said, "Hey, Christy, my grad student, did you keep those
yeah,
midge? And let's try to find those."
let's try.
But DNA
Okay,
degrades over
so,
time, though, if you don't store it properly. So it might be a
right.
moot point there,
So,
and we'll just look for more.
yep, just look for more. Okay, so, but this is always a risk in anytime we apply a selection pressure. So whether that's spraying a herbicide or spraying an insecticide or choosing genetic resistance, that is something that nature is going to potentially have an adaptation for already or develop one over time. So Santosh, explain then how, as the wheat breeder, you create these lines that have the SM1 gene and maybe this other one. But then when these lines get released, they're a varietal blend. What does a varietal blend mean? So when I see a name followed by VB, what does that mean?
Right. So for obvious reasons that we discussed, a variety that has SM1 gene, every seed, every plant that grows out of the seed will have the SM1 gene. Now, when you plant it across thousands of acres and hectares, the midge insect doesn't has any plant that it can survive on. So it starts to develop that resistance mechanism. To prolong the effectiveness of that gene, it was proposed that if we plant some susceptible varieties with the resistant ones, then the midge can go and lay eggs on those, and then they can still eat and not develop resistance. But the challenge is that the variety that we are growing and the one that is being mixed should be very similar.
Right.
It should have similar maturity, similar
Mm,
height, similar test weight, and as much as possible, they should be very similar. But these are more
right.
important traits, and
Yep.
that allows. So when we make the blend, which is 90% of the resistant and 10% susceptible, the the farmers get this blend and they grow it. That allows the insect to still be able to feed without developing resistance. But they can do it for 2 years. So the
Right.
varietal blend can be grown for 2 years under the Mead stewardship, and details are on the website.
Yep.
After which they have to go and buy the certified seed again.
Yep.
This is done to make sure that the ratio doesn't change, because if the ratio changes, you may have more of the midge resistant line because it tends to survive.
Hmm.
The seed count from the harvest may be lower on the susceptible because it was
Right.
devastated by midge. So to maintain that balance, we have to go back to the certified seed and make sure that there is that 90 to 10 or close to that ratio when we are growing it. And that's why all the midge tolerant varieties are sold as varietal blends, and it is encouraged that they are grown as such as well.
Right. So the year I buy, so if it was 2023, I bought a varietal blend, I grow it out, I can save some of that harvest, plant it this year, but that would be the last year I could do that from that seed purchase. I would have to buy a new batch of certified varietal blend for 2025.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yes,
Okay. And so that and that's a good way to think about it is as you harvest the susceptible variety is probably not going to yield as much if midge pressure was high, especially. And so what
that
you
is,
save might have, proportionately less than that 10% in the
that is
sample.
correct. Let's say if the
Yeah.
variety
Okay.
that we mix is a later maturing variety. So your midge resistant variety matures fast and the later maturing variety is still developing, then you have lots
Yeah.
of green seed,
Yeah.
seeds that are not fully formed, and they may be heavier in weight, they may be lighter in weight, they may fall off the combine on the backside. There are many
Yeah.
reasons why the ratios get affected. So that's why we make
Mm-hmm.
sure that a blend is chosen very carefully with all these in mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't imagine that's super easy, but I understand a lot of work goes into trying to match those
What,
lines
yes, and
as
what
close as
breeders
possible.
do, yes, and what breeders do is once if there is a slight deviation in ratio when the blend is being increased, we can always certify a different under circumstances that are not within the control of the farmers or environmental conditions that create some challenges. There is some room to play with those ratio, but we would like to stay to that 90 to 10.
90 to 10. So Tyler, as the one who studies the insects, knowing that there is this other gene that maybe doesn't work quite as effectively but could be used in tandem, how much of a difference does that make when we talk about that selection pressure? If we have, potentially two ways that we're fighting this insect versus one, how much does that improve our chances, let's say?
Okay, interesting. The number that pops into my head is about a 25% reduction in eggs being laid. So I'm going to stick with that because you can get anywhere
Okay.
from 25 to about 50% reduction in oviposition pressure on those oviposition deterrent plants. So
Okay.
we've actually, out of the University of Winnipeg lab run by Alejandro Costamagna, we've got a guy named Chiminda who came out of my same PhD lab. And Dr. Chiminda has been figuring out the mechanism of oviposition deterrence, and it's been very cool. So imagine my head as a
So,
wheat spike.
okay, that's
It
easy to
shouldn't
do.
be very
So thank you
hard.
for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Now,
Yes.
where my hands are, this is the head space. And so I'm using my
Uh-huh.
head as an example because it's the head
Okay.
space. In this
Uh-huh.
headspace are about 3 compounds that need to be in the proper ratio for a wheat midge female to say, this is a wheat spike. I'm going to go land
Mm,
on Tyler's head.
right.
If those are out of ratio, she's like, I'm not really sure if that's a good head to go
Mm,
lay eggs on. And I'm not going to fly there.
right.
And
Hmm.
so Chiminda's figured out what is going on in that oviposition deterrence gene and what is going on with that oviposition deterrent trait. So it's mixing up the ratios so that the wheat midge is like, I'm not really sure if this is a good
Yeah.
place.
That's fascinating. And so the number we're, let's say, going with about a 25% egg laying reduction, roughly.
Yeah. So that came out of some earlier
Okay.
papers.
Yep.
Problem with oviposition deterrence, and I know that Santosh said it's in one place. There are a couple of other places on the genome that we're getting these quantitative trait loci flashing up that might also be oviposition deterrence. So we might be able to look at a few different genetic regions and get them into one plant and have multiple oviposition deterrence. And that could be the interplay of the different volatiles in that headspace coming from different places on the genome, and one's being upregulated, one's being downregulated. Maybe something is in that mix that the wheat midge doesn't actually like the smell of.
Yeah.
So definitely more research yet to be done.
Now you mentioned, and as our time starts to run out here, I do want to talk about the year ahead. Producer Jay, if you could bring up, we did get the survey from 2023 from Saskatchewan. Again, I'll note there isn't one from Manitoba. And any of you Albertans, if you want to shout out if you've got anything to share, that'd be great too. Now I will. So this just came out today. I thought, what lucky timing! It's like they knew I was going to host this show tonight. So this is a Midge survey, and the press release that came out with this stipulated that we're calling it the 2023 survey. We are not calling it a 2024 forecast for reasons. You can ask Saskatchewan about that. But Tyler, when we map any insect population, some of them can be a good indication of where we might be looking for trouble. Sometimes it's not super related. It all depends on the pest. Looking back over the last few years with the reduced moisture, is it really that moisture drives our biggest problems, or is a survey like this a really good indicator of where I need to be looking for these pests?
Well, that's why we do these surveys, because it is a really good indicator. In those red areas, if they get enough rainfall in a big dump, this is one of the things that we've been figuring out lately, the wheat midge will come out of the ground. So in those red hot spots, those are actual wheat midge that are not parasitized, that are in the ground. And so that whole area that you see on the map there, they take surveys from over 400 fields, and they're soil coring it. And so you punch a few soil cores in a field, you rinse off the soil, and you count the wheat midge pupae that are in the ground. And so this is based on actual numbers of wheat midge. When I say viable, or when the map says viable as well, that means I don't have a parasitoid sitting in my gut, because if I did, the following year, you're going to get a little wasp coming out, and you're not going to get a wheat midge coming out. And
there... Sorry, yeah. And I know this isn't your survey, but do they also, is there somewhere that they keep track of how many have been attacked by a parasitoid? And is there a map of that? Because that would be cool.
There isn't a map. If you ask nicely, you can get that data.
Okay, writing it down. I will send out hats to everybody who can get that for me. Okay, so, but that is something you can actually see, right? Is that, and Tyler, maybe let's back up a step. How does the parasitoid attack the wheat midge?
All right. Because this is so our main parasitoid, Macroglenis penetrans, is a little pteromallid wasp, and it is really well synchronized with the wheat midge that is really well synchronized with the spring wheat. So female comes out, and about 7 days later, the parasitoid comes out, because that parasitoid is looking to lay its eggs into the eggs, or those first instar larvae of the wheat midge. And then that egg develops inside the body of the wheat midge larva to a certain point, and then that wheat midge larva, you could probably throw that up on the screen, the third instar wheat midge larva. And those things drop to the ground whenever you get the rains in August. And then there they go. So then they'll dig into the ground, and they form an overwintering cocoon. Now, we saw that pupa already at the beginning with the devil horns. And that thing doesn't happen if it's been parasitized. So you get the cocoon, the wheat midge starts coming out, and it's like, oh, now the parasitoid is going to burst out through my body wall, and I'm dead.
Nice.
And so then they'll do their own little pupation.
Okay, that's my next question. So then they emerge. Okay, yeah.
And then they emerge about 7 days after the females start to come out. So this is another reason for not hopping on your sprayer too late, because you can torch all of those parasitic wasps in the field. And so I've been putting up yellow sticky cards to try to catch wheat midge, but I took out 3,000 parasitic wasps over a 3-day period in my field. And
And how
so to
many midge did you
qualify that,
catch?
0. I
Yeah.
caught 0 midge.
Oh,
Yeah.
Tyler.
So the midge aren't really very attracted to yellow sticky cards, but apparently the
No.
parasitoids are. But what that
Yes.
does tell me is why I'm having trouble getting my midge nursery over that grade threshold of 1 on 10 heads, which I'm out there 8:30 at night for way too many nights in the summer, looking for
July.
those
Yeah.
females in July. Yeah. And I'm like, what? Where are all the females? So they're being suppressed by the wheat midge population the wheat midge parasitoid population that's built up in
Parasitoids.
my field.
Just get Santosh to send you some. He's got lots at Brandon. He said.
I may have
He's
to do
got
that. Yeah.
tons. Yeah, just get them. Okay, so given conditions, the parasitoid could be a very is another tool in the toolbox. It's one that we don't necessarily have a lot of control over, but Tyler, as you said, it is something that we can at least not harm by making sure that if we are going to spray, we're not too late, because as you said, they come out 7 days later, right? So if it's in
That's
full
right. Yeah.
anthesis, and probably too late. Santosh, I want to look at some of the upcoming lines. Producer Jay, if you could put up the list of wheat lines that are coming, because one of my questions is, of course, so that video that Tyler did was from about 4 years ago. How have we done since, Santosh, as far as are these? I know that some of these are quite new, and maybe you can explain the asterisks on the bottom. I'm just going to shout out, though, I did ask this question of Santosh before we went live, and if anyone's curious, yes, the Dutton might have some Yellowstone connection. Anyway, okay, so walk us through here. Some of these are relatively new. Some of these are what is the single asterisk for Derby? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I'll just quickly mention that a list of lines is available on the website, but and it covers most of the wheat classes, not just the CWRS, which is what I have mentioned here. So these are all CWRS lines. Most of the producers, farmers would be very familiar with Wheatland and Starbuck. They may have seen or heard about Hodge or grown Hodge as well. Dutton is a new line from our program that is with CCAN. And yes, there is a town called Dutton close to Winnipeg that used to have an elevator and not anymore. So we commemorized the location. But I love that show, and I was very pleased to use the name Dutton. It should be available from CCAN very soon. Walker is another line that is from our program and is with FP Genetics, and should be available 2 years from now, if not sooner. Derby is a unique one, which is 5 days earlier than Carberry, yields 5% more than Carberry. And if you are in those early maturing regions, when you want early maturing varieties in the Parkland region, for example, or Swan River area, that's where you would like to grow Derby, because it's quite a bit early maturing. It's CWRS, and it has a line called Hassler. The challenge with Derby was just a small story about, all breeding lines have stories, but one story about Derby was that it never sold actually when we released it, because it was so early. We didn't have any refuge for it. There was nothing close to that early maturing that we could blend in it. So I was challenged by the seed companies that if you have a line that is not midge tolerant and is as early, then we'll buy both from you, because we have nothing to blend with it. And next year, by the grace of God, we had Hassler, which looks exactly like Derby, but without SM1 and 5 days earlier than Carberry. So that made the dynamic duo. And that's when this variety was released. Again, this is with FP Genetics. 5095 is a new line from Richard Cuthbert's program out of Swift Current. Amazing line, very good straw strength, high yielding, midge tolerant. And 1127 is a new line that we are proposing to the Prairie Grain Development Committee this year for support of registration. It is a midge tolerant line. And so far, this is the highest yielding line from our program. So if it gets supported and if it falls into the CWRS class, that hopefully will be available to the farmers soon.
Okay. How long does it usually take from, so where this one is now that you're putting forward to registration, how many years then of, let's say it goes through, how long till
Yeah,
it's commercially available?
I would say between 4 and 5. I
Yep.
don't
Okay.
think I have seen anything earlier than that, especially if the companies who are very interested in it and are willing to do an increase, like an off-season increase
Yep.
in New Zealand, then they accelerate that
Yep.
cycle or the pipeline and can make it available sooner. But I would say between
Mm-hmm.
3 and 5 years.
Okay. So, everyone out there, become a wheat breeder. You can spend your winter in New Zealand, or at least part of it. Anyway, Santosh, you're a very smart man. Let me tell you, that's super cool, and I love that we have breeding programs that do these things. And I love that there are stories for all of these lines. One of my favorite stories about Carberry is I was at the Swift Current Research Station with Ron DePaw when he had not yet Carberry and much more were just coming out. And he showed me he had the lineage on his wall, and he wrote in where they would go on there, and he told me their names before they were actually official. And I felt so incredibly special. Anyway, that's my Carberry story and my Ron DePaw story. So there you go. Okay, we are out of time. This is fantastic. Thank you, Santosh. Thank you for joining us from New Zealand.
Thank
Sorry
you for having me.
to take over your afternoon. And Tyler, thank you for your gruesome pictures. We really appreciate how disgusting the insects are. We really do.
You're welcome.
All right. Yes, and thanks so much, of course, to everyone joining me in the comment section and watching along tonight. Head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomist to get those CEU credits. And next week, of course, is depending on where you are, it's Family Day, it's Louis Riel Day, but it is a holiday next Monday, so the agronomist will return the week after that. So no agronomist next week. Just keep that in mind. And with that, thank you so much, Santosh and Tyler, and everybody have a great night. Cheers, everybody.
Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.